So it's Saturday today. Hoping to get a decent amount of work done on Lazy Pirates. I'll show you what myself and Joe and Charlie have sort of changed, for the newer version going forward. Currently trying to buy a house with my girlfriend, so we've got to go do a bit of stuff with that today. But other than that, pretty free weekend, so hoping to get quite a bit of work done. All right, so among other things, Joe has been working on this new method for firing where you can aim at a location and it will shoot cannonballs in an arc over to it, which would allow us to have a little bit more complexity in the, in the aiming gameplay for, for players when they're actually trying to shoot. It sort of allows us to do a couple more things. It also adds more weapon variety because you can have cannons that have flatter trajectories and more arced trajectories, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's pretty cool. He's also been doing stuff with ship generation, but I don't really have anything to demo for that now. So I figured I'd give you a quick fly around of the final level that we had for the jam, just because I don't think I showed it off particularly well in the last video, and I quite like to show. Joe added this little starting area, which is kind of nice. It gives just a little bit of context from where you start, and I worked on this level primarily. It did like a lot of the overall design. I think I had like a sketch somewhere that was just like roughly what I wanted it to look like, and then went off that. So we start the player off in like a little bit of a corridor. It's not. I was thinking a bit thinner and longer originally, but it's just sort of somewhere for them to start, so it's a bit more enclosed and it's almost a safe space. Then they come out and there's like a couple of I don't know what to call these turrets, castles. I'll call them turrets because that's basically what they are. Turrets on each side, just for a little bit of combat as you get out, just to get you used to it. You can see all the green squiggles. Those are paths that the animals follow when they fly around or swim around, and they break sometimes apparently. But yeah, so added this cool little sort of nook cove kind of idea. I liked the idea of you've got this sort of central big island that you can sail around, and then these little interesting coves off the side of that you can get into. So I did this one as I feel like the majority of people tend to go right. So if you went right, you would be introduced to like a fairly simple little cove idea. And then following around to here, there's a nice bit of open space, not too many enemies, so it's nice and easy. And then you've got like, some fairly simple sort of islands, bits of treasure dotted around, and then a bit more of a complicated area around here to get into here. There's quite a few turrets. A lot of these you can't actually hit, so you'll have to like get through quite quickly. And then to add a bit of variety, because I was sick of using the same colored terrain assets for this whole area, I was like, I'm going to add a bit of Arctic stuff. We were using this low poly terrain pack that I had for a lot of these assets, and it had some ice levels, and I thought, well, that'd be a kind of a nice thing to add. They're actually all gone now because they weren't working very well, but I did have a bunch of penguins and some polar bears on here that would waddle around, but we didn't really have time to like optimize them, and sort of they chucked a bit of a performance overhead on top of the game, which wasn't really necessary. But I thought having just a slight bit of difference in the level breaks it up a little bit, right? But yeah, a couple more islands. This is probably the most difficult part of the game. It's, I think, harder if you approach it from this angle because you come through all these like turrets over here, and then getting through here is quite difficult with the movement system, especially with a bunch of turrets firing at you, adding a lot of like mental fatigue over the top. I think you could squeeze through there, but I never actually managed to do it with our controls. In the video you saw me come through here, which is definitely the smoother pathway to get in there. And in fact, if you actually do go left at the start and manage to get through this area, then that's probably a better way to get through this overall. But yeah, again, same sort of principle over here. Little cove, couple of little islands, hiding stuff in there. So yeah, that's the overview of the level that is currently on itch. I think you got the sort of feel for the kind of level that we wanted there, which was like, we want this sort of enclosed space with a bunch of sort of islands and enemies dotted around it. That's how we want to divvy things up. So for the actual game, what we're currently working on is, one of the things I'm currently working on is trying to get some sort of island generation done that works a little bit. And then we were trying to figure out a way to sort of encapsulate the area you're in, because we don't want the player to be able to explore like a fully open ocean, because it doesn't suit what we're trying to achieve with the overall like gameplay loop, the sort of larger meta loop, which is going through these smaller island areas. And so what I've ended up with here is a grid-based generation system that will populate a bunch of random stuff. You'll have to excuse the fact that the ship flies if one generates underneath it, and Also the fact that the assets that I'm placing in the world are pretty random. Nothing is to scale yet. This is just sort of to get the feel for it. So here's how the generation system works, right? I draw a grid size, which is based off this. So this is actually the sort of physical size of the map that you're going to have in the world. And I tell it how many grid lines or grid elements to add. So I add 4 in the X and 5 in the Y. It's actually the Z here where it says Y, but X and Y because it's coordinates, right? And then I tell it how many islands and how many extras I want to spawn. The idea here being that islands would be like more consistent things in the game. So these would be larger points such as a shop, a reward island, like a main fight island, a boss island, stuff like that. And then extra spawns are more frivolous. They could be small rewards, they could be small traps, they could be small little enemy areas, they could be just smaller broken up islands with enemies dotted around them. Essentially, extra bits of the level that flesh it out, but aren't the core components that you require on every level. The offset just sort of moves where the grid generation is going to be, because it if you move the offset, it starts from 0, 0, so it would go out to here. So usually the offset ends up just being for the current way we're doing it, the offset end up just being negative a half of whatever the map size is to bring it back to center. And then I add in cell padding, which allows me to determine how distinct how much guaranteed space I have between elements in these grids. And then for the grids themselves, what I actually do is just you have a list of currently just a list of islands and extras that you can spawn. This will obviously be a bit more fleshed out and thoughtful when we're going for the actual final generation in terms of what we do actually want to populate the world with. But for the moment, it's just sort of throwing stuff down and seeing where it lands. But yeah, so the cell size is calculated based off of the padding and the map size, and then it uses a form. So if I hit space a few times in scene, you can see it changing here. Should really add a button for generating here, but that's just the way it is. So this sort of uses a similar method to a lot of the ways that people fake Voronoi noise, or I think Worley noise is the more normalized grid version of Voronoi. So that means that I have this set of grids and I pick a random point in each grid for something to spawn on. Then there's a little bit of placement logic that I have myself here for these. So how I handle that is islands can't have an island within 2 across or 1 diagonally from themselves. So I think probably if I open paint, this would be easier. Do I have paint ready to go? Yeah. So if we have a grid here, excuse my very, very bad drawing of a grid. Yeah, this is looking pretty grid-like, you get the feel. So if I was to spawn an island here, this one in a shape like this, right? So essentially an extended cross. It blocks off other island spawns in those locations, and it blocks off. Sorry, not this one. Actually, ignore that. In fact, I can just undo that. Look at that. Go paint skills. It blocks off these locations for extras to spawn, but extras can spawn closer than islands because obviously extras are a smaller location and we want them to be a bit more frequent, and it's not so bad if they're closer to the main locations. But we don't want, for example, to have your shop, your boss fight, and I don't know, the treasure island or whatever it would be, all in the same location right next to each other, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of spreading them out of the island. So that's the basic logic I'm working with for the generation. Obviously, the final product and how it actually looks is not at all really what we have in mind yet. It's more just sort of trying to figure out how we can use the generation to create the kind of level experience we want for the player, which is, we drop them into these little, these little dioramas, these pirate dioramas with a bunch of islands to go explore, and then have them, go sail off and find them to go. Yeah, my ship has blasted off into space here. I was going to say if I restart this, I'll also try and show you the fog, which would probably be easiest if I could get the ship to move a little bit. See if I can play with the player controls over. Push him. There we go. You have to excuse all the ship stuff still. It's all very thrown together, sort of, with the post-down version. Oh, my fog is a little bit broken here. So I wanted to try and add fog to the edges of the map because I wanted the like a consistent way that we could border the world. It's a bit janky there. I think if I try and maybe if I add a bit more width to the shape here, it won't look as bad because they won't spawn in quite so early. But yeah, the fog is actually just a big sprite surrounding the world, which I think actually gives off like a slightly better effect. It needs tweaking, but it's not a bad effect, all things considered, that this is just a big sprite and it's not 3D at all. I think the water lends it in favor. And then I've just got a big circular particle system that is spawning little smoke effects that fade in and out that sort of add a tiny bit of sort of noise, you can see like over there, to how the fog looks, although the particle system appears to have broken since I last opened the project, so I guess that's something I'll look into fixing today.